Okay, good morning. Good morning, Revolution, and welcome to our Friday show. We're a little on the delay this morning. And I'm here with Rosanna and Scott and Taryn, and Joe is away this week. He'll be back next week. And we have a lot of topics to cover today. And one of them was kind of like pulled on us, I mean, our president, Joe Biden, made it hard for Friday morning shows by giving late night Thursday speeches. But I thought we'd talk just a minute or two about his speech last night. If you've seen it or if you read the coverage, he seemed to give a very strong speech and referenced the hecklers in the audience who were trying to disrupt. So it was an interesting presentation that he had, and a call for unity to defeat fascism and defend democracy. So I thought we'd at least go around and get one takeaway. What's your takeaway, Rosanna, from the speech first? And what's one thing that impressed you about the coverage or the speech or its aftermath?
Well, I didn't get to hear it. I was at my club meeting, so I don't know anything. But if I think the important part is to focus on the content and the issues that he brings up, uh, and do they fit with our program, and do they benefit the working class? I think those are the points that we should all focus on.
Right, that would be the focus, the filter through which we should evaluate. Scott, what's a
Exactly.
takeaway that you have from this speech or its coverage?
I agree with Rosanna. I think he did. I mean, the line he was drawing was really clear that there is an extremist, and he said elsewhere, semi-fascist threat. We say there is a fascist threat um, uh, presented by these MAGA Republicans, and he contrasted that with equality and democracy, and also with these big achievements in infrastructure spending, um, in the climate bill that he presented as possible, through kind of mass unity. Obviously, there are, as there always are in dealing with bourgeois democracy, there are contradictions, right, between the uh, domestic rhetoric and the foreign policy, uh, between the ruling class, which always um, is ready to compromise with reaction rather than fighting it. But I mean, it was definitely a speech that moved in the right direction. Um,
Great. Okay. Taryn, your takeaway?
Well, I thought it was interesting how yesterday Donald Trump gave a speech, or he didn't give a speech. He was on some right wing radio show, but he basically said that if he was reelected, that he would not only pardon all of the January 6th rioters, but actually make the U.S. government apologize to these rioters. And so I felt like this speech was kind of a counterweight to what it was that Donald Trump said that day, where it's sort of like, I don't feel like, midterms are always a little bit sleepy. I don't think people really quite understand what's riding on these that are coming up, and so I think it was good to sort of give people a reality check. My big critique with it is that for some reason he keeps on appealing to the police and to the military. Like last night, he had 2 Marines flanking him, and he's appealing to them as one might need to say it's up to you to protect the Constitution. It's up to you to protect democracy. You can't be pro-American and pro-insurgency and stuff. But the real forces that are going to come out and defend the imperfect bourgeois democracy that we have are like the people, not necessarily the police and the military. I think he's, if anything, kind of showing the right-wing nature of some of these forces. So I know it made the right wing really, really upset, his speech. So.
Yes, I think it did. And even the comment, Rosanna, last week, he did call the MAGA Republicans semi-fascist. And I wonder, what do you think about the term semi-fascist? And do you think at least Biden's getting a little closer to uh, getting it right on the MAGA Republicans?
Yeah, I think it's unusual for a sitting president, to make such comments. So it's one step. It's an indication of what he wants the American people to, how he wants the American people to see things, which we see that as well. We say they're a fascist element, semi-fascist. It's one step closer to, our point of view.
Mhm. Okay, well, we'll maybe have a little bit more to say about that speech, but by next week it'll be old news, and it sounds like he's really on the campaign trail for the midterms. So it will be interesting to see how that comes along. Well, our another speaking of rifts in the ruling class, we see the ruling class in our perspective as sometimes we talk about it like it's a monolith. And it is very successful about, acting in its own interest, in its own class interests. But there's a new law in Texas that we read about that prohibits Texas agencies from investing in companies that choose not to invest in climate change, good, clean fuel, and or they choose not to invest in firearms manufacturers, and they've removed millions of dollars from the likes of Goldman Sachs and BlackRock. So, Scott, I wonder, what do you make of this? Um, are we seeing new fissures in the ruling class, or what we call the ruling class in this country, or is it corporation against corporation, or what's going on here?
I think there's definitely a fissure that's becoming clearer and clearer um, between, on the one hand, uh, more and more investment companies, money managers are moving toward what are called ESG uh, standards, or environmental, social, and governance standards, meaning that they pledge not to um, invest the money that people place with them in things that are, environmentally destructive or socially destructive, or don't reflect, democracy, or whatever. Obviously, this is, we know as Marxists that capital cannot, lead the struggle for democracy. But it's interesting because this does show that more and more this mass kind of progressive and people's pressure toward reining in capital, um, limiting its worst tendencies, is having some effect. And these firms are moving in the direction of at least, a paper commitment to responsibility, because they know that um, you know, uh, governments, for example, are government agencies, and state pension funds, public pension funds, are not going to deal with them if they don't, adopt a certain kind of standards, and that people are going to turn away from funds that are clearly, labeled as destructive or anti-democratic or whatever. So this is it's a manifestation, I think, of the big changes. And of course, you have on the other side these MAGA um, Republicans, these fascist, ultra-reactionary elements, who are pushing back against any attempt to tame or domesticate capital at all. Who are pushing for, we see this in Florida and in Texas with some people call it anti-woke investing, or um, things like that. So there is a fissure, yes.
Right. And our picture is of the state treasurer for West Virginia, which also has taken steps to take money out of investments in companies where they're pulling back on coal production. So they actually seeing investment in weapons manufacturers as part of the defense of the Second Amendment. So, Rosanna, I know you're on the other side of the country and you're not exposed to the DeSantis rhetoric on a daily basis, and you're lucky that you're not. But he's, of course, the Florida governor running for re-election this fall, and he seems to be always railing against the corporations. And as Scott said, it's the woke corporations. And I wondered what you thought about how should we respond to that kind of anti-corporate rhetoric coming from the far right, which I would say he is. How should we respond to that, and how can we show people that it's not really anti-corporate at all? What do you think?
Well, I think understanding that they're driven by profit, and so they're looking to see what's going to be more profitable, and they're trying to make assessments, and they're trying to figure out, well, maybe this angle will bring me more profits, or maybe that angle will bring me more profits. The fact that we don't have solar panels and water filtration systems and things like that, it's because the companies don't see that as profitable, as other avenues. But I think that, first and foremost, they're driven by profit, and so we can't forget that.
Thank you. Right. Taryn, what about this state treasurers banding together? That was the takeaway from the David Gellis article that we read about this trend among state treasurers. State treasurers are getting together and acting as one, and they're using shared legislation to challenge progressive federal policies on reproductive rights, immigration, trans rights, and all kinds of other issues, just like Republican attorneys general from the states got together and did this. So it's almost like the SCOTUS brought power back to those gerrymandered state legislatures, and now they're not only ruling for their own states, but they're banding together. Are these new formations of political action that we're seeing, do you think, Taryn?
I mean, I think it's hard to say at this point. It is for sure that most of these state legislatures are just taking, template legislation that are designed by these think tanks in Washington. It's the same thing, like you said, with the reproductive rights stuff that now people are running into. I think that every opening that the Supreme Court makes for anti-democratic legislation to go forward on the state level, people, the extreme right has been planning for this for decades. And so I think that they are ready to move in formation. And I don't think that it's a mistake that, I don't feel like we can separate that movement out from what it is that Joe Biden was saying last night about the, semi-fascist threat from these MAGA Republicans. Like, I do feel like they're moving in a very, very extreme anti-democratic direction. I think it's a good thing that corporations, like Disney, for instance, in Florida. Disney, I can't think of a more gender, they're not a progressive company. These are the people who teach you about princesses and sleeping beauties and stuff like that. And yet I think it's a good thing that their employees, right, first and foremost, because Disney employees are extremely exploited, that their employees and their customer base are actually pressuring them to try and take action against somebody like Ron DeSantis, who has basically made it illegal for children to come out in schools without their parents being notified, to discuss certain kinds of issues in school. And as I understand it, also wants to stop people from receiving transgender health care. So I think that that's, even though these corporations are, of course, corporations, and we are anti-monopoly capital, I think it more is like an indication of where folks are at democratically, first and foremost, to be able to, as Rosanna was saying, pressure folks into saying, well, am I going to receive profits from this? And I don't know, there's just something so extremely anti-democratic about what the right is doing across the country right now in state legislatures. And I feel like, I don't know, I guess we're going to have to see how the midterms turn out.
Exactly. Well, one of those areas of is public infrastructure development, and there are funds available through the recent legislatures for legislation for infrastructure, like might have saved the water supply in Jackson, Mississippi. You may have read, I'm sure most of our listeners have read about this Jackson water emergency as a result of recent flooding and damage to water pumps that were really suffering from deferred maintenance. Now about 150,000 people are completely without water in Jackson, Mississippi, a city that is 83% African American. And they're saying there's no end in sight for this shortage. So, Rosanna, should we be surprised that this happened to the residents of Jackson? And what do you think about the root causes of this crisis that they face right now?
Well, as a communist, I'm not surprised, but I think overall, I ask all working class people to think about the fact that in the richest country in the world, we are having people suffering in this way. Our tax dollars, where are our tax dollars going? We need to ask that question. How is this money being spent? Is it being spent wisely? These are the kinds of questions that, that we need to be asking ourselves, because there is no reason why we have the kind of crises that we do have, other than once again the greed and the drive for profits, and the insensitivity of the lack of uh, thinking about the working class and its needs, the citizens of this country. And I think that we have infiltration systems. We have all the technology to have avoided such a catastrophe. And so I think there's no reason. There is no reason, and we need to ask ourselves, why is this happening, and uh, how can I help to avoid this kind of change to avoid this kind of situation in the future? Because as we know, we're jumping from catastrophe to catastrophe in the United States. I mean, there's just all kinds of issues that going on, and there's no reason to it. There is no reason. We have the resources, we have the technology. We just need to spend it on people's needs and not corporate greeds.
Exactly. I heard someone say that they had a raft of money that they spent on crime in Mississippi instead of on these kind of infrastructure projects. But Taryn, you have an economic point of view. What does this situation say about the way that public goods are financed? Because one of the things I heard about the mayor, that the mayor said it would cost something like $2 billion to fix the water system, the water pump systems in this town, this city of Jackson. He Where can a municipality come up with money like that? And how can we rectify that situation when some cities are in need of more funds? I'm sure the richest cities in even in Mississippi are not suffering from these kind of problems. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot, especially in this kind of situation, of what Ruth Wilson Gilmore and others call organized abandonment, because this is not the exact same thing that happened in Flint, but it's very close to what has happened in Flint. And Flint still doesn't have clean water. Jackson is the capital of Mississippi, and it is a majority Black town, as is Flint. And so I feel like there's almost this I don't want to call it a frog in a pot of boiling water thing going on here, but it's sort of like, if you can look away at when COVID is killing the elderly and the infirm, and you can look away when majority Black cities now no longer have access to clean water, that's something that doesn't just stay there. That's something that is spreading out from this sort of like I guess abandoned communities, right? Because these aren't just abandoned communities in terms of like federal spending. These are also communities that have lost access to good jobs, because of deindustrialization. Now, I think that if Jackson needs $2 billion to fix the water situation, then by all means, they should have as much money as they require to fix the situation. And I hope that they would put it to work with good union jobs in Jackson, Mississippi. I assume that this is not the only infrastructure that needs work in Jackson, Mississippi. And yet, from the federal level, it's all about, well, we're going to hire 100,000 more police officers. I mean, the Pentagon gets almost $2 trillion a year, or sorry, $1 trillion a year in terms of spending. And so $2 billion is really a drop in the bucket. And if we need to, look at that as like a jobs program or something, then by all means it should happen. But it's sort of like, what's going to be more profitable for Wall Street at this point? Is it fixing Jackson's water supply, or is it going to be, making more F-35s that don't work? So it's all about priorities and where it is that people want to put that. And I know that in Jackson, they're very organized on the local level around these things, but you know, and this sort of goes to show you how you can't just organize locally. Not that people in Jackson, Mississippi believe that, but there has to be solidarity efforts. There has to be approaches at the state and at the national level to try and tackle these problems of infrastructure. And so Green New Deal, it needs to have happened yesterday.
Exactly. Well, Scott, a few people out in the wake of this crisis have really pointed to the question of racism because of the fact that the city is majority African American. Latasha Brown, who was the Black Voters Matter person, said the root of the crisis is systemic racism. And I just wondered what you thought is the role of systemic racism here, and is it also systemic classism, anti-working class, and also how can we fight against this? What do you think, Scott?
I think the root of the problem, broadly speaking, is capitalism, both in the sense that the you know the completely heedless and reckless um, use of resources without regard to sustainability is worsening the climate crisis that makes catastrophes like the flooding more and more frequent, and as Taryn pointed out, the um, diversion of the resources that are necessary to respond to them. But systemic racism is part of capitalism. It has always been part of white supremacy has always been part of capitalism. Um, and it is not an accident that it's cities like Flint and Jackson that are bearing the brunt. Just as people of color have always borne like the heaviest and most severe attack of capital and the most brutal and exploitative conditions. So the fight for the liberation of the working class as a whole, the fight for a better world, in fact, for everybody, is inconceivable without, absolutely taking on systemic racism, which is, along with male supremacy and other forms of oppression, baked into capitalism.
Well said. Okay, let's move on to our last topic, which is on outbreak of polio in New York. Now, polio was eradicated in 1979 in the United States, but now it seems to be back. I'm old enough to remember lining up for the sugar cubes in the late 50s in New Jersey to take those vaccines when they came out, and it was seen as a boon. Everybody was enthusiastic about it, but now it has been found in wastewater in New York, in 2 New York counties. And then, sure enough, one confirmed case has been found. And an article by Dr. Mary Bassett, who's the New York State Health Commissioner, said that polio is a threat in New York. One case of paralytic polio, which was discovered, really is indicative of an outbreak of polio virus, because this virus, people who contract it sometimes have no symptoms or have only mild symptoms and don't realize they have a virus that potentially could paralyze them. So it is a very it can be a very deadly and disabling virus. So Rosanna, there seems to be evidence that vaccine misinformation is targeted at certain vulnerable minority communities. And you mentioned earlier in regard to our other topic that it's profit above all. What profit do you think these anti-vax or vaccine information folks are trying to reap from their activities? What do you think, Rosanna?
I'm sorry, I
First part of
think
the question.
either I froze or you froze, so I didn't really get the question. I
Okay.
get fully the question,
Well,
but
I want. Go ahead.
I'm not too familiar with the vaccine and the controversy around it, so I don't think I could really comment. Have a good
Hmm.
comment, or not a good comment, but
That's
a
fine. Yeah,
relevant comment.
it was kind of a roundabout kind of question, but we'll go to Taryn. Taryn, why do you think we're facing this situation? That's maybe what I should have asked first. Why are we facing this situation? of the first case of paralytic polio after all these years of eradication. And of course, there have been some cases in the United States, but they've been cases that had their origin in other countries. But this is the first case that was homegrown. So, what do you think? Why now?
I think that, public health is closely related to what's going on in Jackson, Mississippi. And I've sometimes said that, the thing that they're going to miss the most, and they won't realize it until it's gone in the UK, is the NHS, is the national healthcare system. They've been trying to privatize that since basically it came out, but of course there have been upticks in the last decades of it. And folks have been looking at sort of the bad service that they've been receiving as the state goes in and cuts more and more from the NHS, and using this as like a privatization logic in their own heads of saying, well, maybe we do need to have private insurance involved. But I can't think of a country that's going to suffer more when you take that away from them than the UK. I think that in the United States, the major kind of infrastructure investments, well, not like the most major, but one of the most major infrastructure investments that happened in the post World War II space was around water infrastructure and delivering clean and healthy water to folks. And so I think that that's one of those things that we take for granted in the United States that we won't know until it's gone, as it is disappearing in places like Jackson. Likewise, I think that public health, or any kind of effort at public health, is something that is being stripped away from people in this country. There are ways to deal with all of these diseases. There are ways to deal with people's health. The fact that the life expectancy in the United States has tumbled again, like another 2 years or something. I think we're looking at 70 or something like that. Ridiculous in terms of life expectancy. That's something that most people think to themselves, well, it could happen to somebody else, it's not going to happen to me. And I think that approaching public health with that kind of mindset of like, well, I should be okay, I'm not so sure about other people, but I should be okay, leaves people space to say, well, if these folks don't want to get vaccinated, then maybe that's their own choice. They don't see it as being sort of like a collective effort at maintaining the labor force, at maintaining public health. I think it's really unfortunate that the communities that are targeted for this kind of misinformation are the communities who are generally most affected by this lack of infrastructure, whether it's clean water or in terms of vaccinations. Now, of course, there's a history in this country of especially vulnerable populations, especially Black and Puerto Rican people of being tested on medically, and so there's that. But I don't think that's a reason for folks to give up. I think that's a reason for people to say, okay, so we need to expend extra effort in explaining public health to these communities, like where in Rockford County the polio outbreak is taking place. People need to care about each other, and they need to understand that just because somebody else's house is on fire doesn't mean that yours isn't also going to catch on fire in the future.
Exactly. So, Rosanna, I know we're very skeptical sometimes of pharmaceutical companies, and we're always looking at pharmaceutical companies and realizing that they are in it for the profit. And yet we have to walk a fine line and tell people they can trust vaccinations, which are products of those same companies. So how do you see us threading that needle between skepticism and recognition of science?
Well, I think first and foremost, you have to make sure that you understand how your own body functions and reacts to things, and and fights, germs and diseases, and then also look at the population. Look at what's happening all around you. Who's getting sick? Who's not getting sick? These kinds of things, and what are the effects and the side effects of some of these vaccines? And you have to make a determination for yourself. But first and foremost, I think you have to really know your own body and make a decision, because I remember back some, I don't know, 40 years or so ago, there was some kind of an injection that was given to young girls that ended up being it sterilized them, and they were able to have children. So it is something that's concerning, and you just have to, I guess, determine what your risk factors are and what's really best for you.
Mhm. Okay. Well, before we go to the goodbyes, I think we have to say goodbye to Mr. Gorbachev. And I know, Scott, I think you wanted to have just a word on the death of Gorbachev this week. And I thought I'd let you have that last word before we say happy Labor Day to everybody. What do you think? What's your
Well,
take on that?
you know, it's interesting to see the way the sort of predictable way that the bourgeois media is reacting to this with the effusive praise for the great statesman who whatever. One article I saw was Putin is undoing Gorbachev's work of détente with the West, trying to counterpose like the great hero who brought down the Soviet Union and the man they keep trying to frame as like the KGB agent who's trying to bring it back, which is ridiculous. But you know, Gorbachev, the end of the Soviet Union was a tragedy for the working class of the world. There were deep flaws. Gorbachev was not the only one responsible for its failure, but to my mind, he is not somebody that should be looked to as a model of either for domestic policy or foreign policy or building socialism or anything of the sort. So
Exactly.
he's he's gone. We're moving on.
Gone.
Yes.
Right.
Thank you.
I was surprised to hear that he was still alive. So that was news to me. It seems so
He had a
long
very
ago.
he was really popular on the sort of university lecture circuit. I remember hearing him speak at a couple different although that actually was a couple of decades ago as well. So maybe
I'm sure he
showing my all right. Anyway,
was
yeah.
compensated generously, I'm sure, for that. So, well, that's it for our show today. And thank you for seeing me through my first moderation of this. And thanks to Joe for giving me the opportunity. And I hope he's feeling better and comes back next week. I'm sure he will. And I would want to wish everyone a happy Labor Day weekend. Have a good Labor Day. Go out and celebrate. Celebrate a lot of municipalities have parades and so forth, picnics, and so it's a chance to have a working class holiday, even though it's not May Day. It's the second best thing. So happy Labor Day. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Happy Labor
Bye.
Day.